In a world where Twitter leads the headlines and the 24-hour news cycle forces people to choose sides, we're here to help you cut through the noise and discover that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Hosted by entrepreneur, author, public speaker, and regular media contributor Seth Denson. Subscribe, share, rank, and review. Welcome to Somewhere in the Middle on the Real News Communication Network.
Welcome back, everybody. Another week, another hot week here in Texas, wherever you're listening from in the listening sphere. But have no fear, because Zach is back.
Aw, thanks, Seth.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, how's it going?
Welcome back. Did you go somewhere cooler?
I went to Michigan, actually. Yeah.
What part?
This part of the glove.
I love that. I was hoping you would do that. So I was in Michigan a couple weeks ago, and somebody pulled out the hand and did the whole we're here thing.
The mitten.
Yeah.
There's something I know Texas. Man, I love Texas. There's nothing quite like it. But there's something to the Michigan hand. It's a universal thing. It's like the Jeep wave. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, where everybody in a Jeep like waves to each other as they're driving. It's encouraging. I guess. I don't know.
Did you drive or fly?
Drove.
Really?
Yeah, 18
straight up
hours.
35.
Yeah, that's right.
Did you go through Indianapolis?
No, I swung by Memphis, though.
Okay.
And stopped at Graceland on the way back. So it was a good time. Yeah, I got some Tennessee barbecue. If you're going to do an 18-hour road trip, you got to make it a road trip.
That's right.
Get some stops in there. Yeah, make it worth something.
Yeah. That's awesome. So I was in Michigan a few weeks ago, as I mentioned earlier, and I got to tell you, I'm with you. I love Michigan. Yeah. The people are great, depending on which part you're in. Probably, I'm sure that there's some areas where they're not big fans of those of us in Texas. I got to spend some time in Grand Rapids and Holland, Michigan. Yeah. Right on Lake Michigan not long ago, and man, the people were great. Yeah. The food was great. The people were great. The weather was, man.
It's divine. It really is. Yeah. No, it's great people up there. I mean it.
Well, good. Well, listen, buddy, we missed you. Matt did a great job.
Yeah?
He did.
All right.
But there's just something about having you on the show. So it feels like home again. So welcome back.
Neat.
Welcome back. Big week this week in travel for me. I got to go up. I was up in Philly and New York this week, so enjoyed a little bit of cooler weather myself. Got back over the weekend, but so I'm glad to be back with everybody. A busy week of travel, but it was fun to sit down this week and really hear about what's going on in the world. And as most of you likely know, if you're following this show, that means you probably listen to politics a little bit. And that we're getting closer and closer to midterm elections. And as we get closer to midterm elections, we start talking about who's raising the most money, who is a viable candidate. Oftentimes that is related to the amount of money that they have raised. And so Sunday morning talk shows, I got to listen to those a little bit this week and really was learning about who all the pundits were saying was going to win because of how much money they had. And it did get me to thinking, though, that does our current structure with Congress not having term limits, in other words, they can be there forever, in conjunction with recent rulings around campaign finance reform, Citizens United, corporations are people, and all of that. And again, I don't want to argue the legal merits of that. I think the Supreme Court looked at the Constitution and made a determination based on that. But just because that's the determination based on the Constitution doesn't necessarily mean it's right. It just means it was legally sound. But it did get me wondering that, are we ultimately ending up with the best people for the best job? Are we ending up with those that can raise the most money and align themselves with those who have the most money and sticking it out forever? In other words, they're there for a long time. And so that's what we'll talk about on today's show. We always have some backup things if we need to, but I got a feeling this is going to take the majority of the show to get through. And we'll try to stay on our time frame here. To have this discussion, though, welcome back into the booth, Andrew Clark. Andrew, buddy.
Good to be here.
One of the kind of behind-the-scenes producers of the show, always has a lot of good thoughts and data points, and his California structural aspect of opining on things. So we'll welcome him to this. But I'm really excited about our special guest in the show. So I am a big believer in that you are who you surround yourself with, but in our formative younger years, that plays a huge role in carving out who we ultimately become. And I was very fortunate growing up to have a lot of folks around me who are just phenomenal people. And these were my coaches and my teachers. And so one of those guys was Alan Weaver. Alan was one of my football coaches growing up, one of our teachers. He is now currently the head basketball coach at Millsap, girls basketball coach. At Millsap High School. His wife, Abigail, was my choir teacher in high school. For those of you who couldn't tell, this voice sings like a bird. Abigail, if you're listening, you may differ on that. But she was my choir teacher. Alan and Abigail met while they were at my high school and got married and have two beautiful children now where are they going to school? Alan?
They're at Weatherford Christian.
Well, Weatherford Christian School. And so Alan is one of the many followers we have of this show.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, not multiple hands here, but
things from small beginnings. Seth.
That's right. We're going places. Anyway, and had been emailing me some thoughts that he'd had and some things over what we had talked about over the last few shows and few weeks, and so I quickly responded and said, "Can you come on the show? How great would this be?" Because Alan is, in addition to being a coach, he's a government teacher. So he teaches government and history, and so some great thoughts on what's going on in the world and carving the minds of the young. And so thought it would be great to have him on show. And in normal fashion, I gave him the list of topics that we would be discussing last week, just in time to send an email at about 5 a.m. this morning saying, yeah, scrap all of that.
Yeah.
We're going a different direction. So I think we will really get his thoughts and opinions on things today because he didn't have time to research a whole lot. But that's okay. And so I'm excited to have you on the show, man.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
I've enjoyed watching and listening to you guys, and like I said in a few of those emails, it's interesting to see different people's take on everything and kind of go from there.
Yeah.
It's going to be like my class.
Good. Let's do it. Well, listen, I've been in your class before, so I'll try to harken back 20 years ago, though.
Yeah. Man, it's been a long time.
As
you can tell from the head on my head, there's no hair, and what's left is gray. So
well, that wasn't my doing, right?
Right.
No.
Okay, good.
Just multiple use over the years.
There you go. There you go. Well, listen, this week, this Sunday morning, I was listening to and watching some of the Sunday morning news programs, and of course, we're coming in on the midterm elections, and the big talking point was about how much money people had raised at this point. Right. So, and not just on the federal topics or federal congressional races, but also state, local races. Of course, here in Texas, for those of you following us here, you've got the congressional race between Ted Cruz, who most people in the United States know. Whether you are from Texas or not, most people know who Ted Cruz is if you follow politics at all. And Beto O'Rourke, the Democratic candidate, who, interestingly enough, I think has really played into this idea that as a Democrat in the state of Texas, it is hard to get elected in a national race. So his talking points, and I haven't done a ton of research on Beto O'Rourke as of yet, but Andrew, I'm sure you have.
Beto.
So there you go. I couldn't even say his name right. I got the last name right, though. And he is a Democrat.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. I was watching an interview he was giving with, I think it was Channel 5 here locally in the Dallas area, or Channel 8. Beto O'Rourke was giving his comments, and I'm sitting here listening, like, I like this guy. I mean,
that's the weird thing. Not to cut you off there. This is because those needles have swung so far each direction. This is the kind of guy that 15 years ago would probably be considered just kind of a liberal Republican, quite frankly. But you have to fall into the Democrat court now, otherwise you can't get those votes. So,
well, that's right. You can't. You don't have the money to compete with a Ted Cruz to run against him in a primary. Right? And we talked about this on the show a couple of weeks ago. That does our current primary system ensure that we end up with candidates on the extremes, right or left? But I'm listening to this guy talk, and I'm going, okay, I kind of like him. Now, does this mean that I will vote for him over Ted Cruz? I haven't made that determination yet. I'm going to listen to both parties and both candidates and hear what they have to say and what their beliefs are on the core things that matter the most to me and I think are ultimately most important. But the challenge is that today's political climate, oftentimes when we look at a situation like we have here in Texas with Ted Cruz versus a Beto O'Rourke, if you are someone who wants to have your party in power at a national level, right? So if I'm looking at the chairmanships and the way that Congress and the Senate will run, and I'm going, man, I might like to vote for this guy, but if I do, I could swing power the other direction. So I'm going to get in line with my party and vote for the guy that's got my R or D ticket because ultimately that's going to be who retains power. It does start to change our approach to an election that we might have a different take on. But what the big thing that was the big topic after Beto had commented on some of the questions that he had was they got into the topic of money and how much more money Ted Cruz has than he does. And so regardless of how he might play into going through and campaigning, does he stand a chance because of the money factor?
Well, he's said that he's not taking any PAC money, no super PAC money.
Right.
And he's only doing grassroots, $5, $10 internet donations, private contributions. And I believe Ted Cruz has a war chest several tens of millions of dollars larger than him. And that buys a lot of billboards.
It does.
Well, and I think 3 weeks ago, just in the quarter spending, O'Rourke actually raised more in that little quarter.
Yep.
But Cruz does have the overall money advantage because of his background, because of his stature and his time in office already. So
yeah, I saw that too.
So O'Rourke's coming.
Yeah.
He's got some money coming, but is it going to be enough? Yeah.
Well, and I think that now he's getting money from the DNC, right, from a national level. They've started looking at this race. I think there was a poll that came out around that same time, 2 or 3 weeks ago, that said that he's within the margin of error now of Ted Cruz. And when that happened, obviously Democrats who have, not just that they want the seat, but they despise Ted Cruz, really started pushing a lot of national money this way. And they weren't going to. They had pretty much said, hey, Texas we're not there. But again, kind of going back to that, do we now live in a world where we can't have a realistic conversation about the right candidate? Rather, we have to look at who has the most money.
With the presidential election, there was that whole talk on third-party votes. So, let's say you can't stand Trump, you can't stand Hillary. Oh, I'm going to vote for Johnson. No. If you vote for Johnson, you're taking a vote away from Hillary, or you're taking a vote away from Trump in these states. And that's, on a practical level, kind of true. But in an idealistic level, you've now subverted the voting process. Because if I believe that third-party candidate is who I want to vote for, I shouldn't vote for the other two. Mm-hmm. But now you're right. Now the Republicans aren't in power, or the Democrats aren't in power, and it can mess all other things up in a chain.
Yeah, if you believe, and again, I want to talk about principles here in a second, because I think that is one of those things like gluten-free. It's massively overused, right? We're all principled in our beliefs. We have principles. I remember a few years ago, everything was about, are you a patriot?
Yeah.
Right? That was the big thing.
Yeah.
Are you a patriot? Well, let's start to look at what patriot really means. And not everybody's a patriot, right? And I'm an American. Does that make me a patriot? Well, maybe. But it was just this, you don't believe the way I believe, so therefore, sir, you are no longer a patriot, right? You're an adversary. And I think that what we have done now is we have gotten to this place where principle is the word of the day. I'm principled in my beliefs.
It's a new buzzword.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the challenge is our democracy, the way it was set up, or our republic, where we elect those who ultimately go and try to stress what is in the best of their entire constituencies. But because of the way that our primaries work, we end up with people who are very principled on one side, and because they're so principled, they get to Washington and I'll talk about Ted Cruz specifically here. I'm so principled I'm not willing to budge on anything, which means we don't get anything done. Alan, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first off, let me disclaim that whatever I say here does not reflect my school.
Fair enough.
But I mean, like I said a minute ago, we discuss a lot of this stuff in my classes, especially on the government side. And I only get a semester with them, and so we kind of have to cram stuff in a lot. But we do spend we spend the first few weeks on the Constitution, make sure they all understand the wording behind it and the things, the things in the amendments, things in the articles and stuff like that. And then we'll start getting into, I have to go by the book a little bit, but we start getting into those things, and we'll talk about things of the day. We usually have a current event day, throughout the semester and things like that. But what I tell my kids, and you kind of touched on it already, but what I tell my kids is, you decide for yourself. Whatever the laws are, whatever the candidates are, whoever they are, decide for yourself. Don't let a principled person, as you just alluded to, don't let them decide for you. And I think that's what I think a lot of kids and a lot of the newer age and even people my age are starting to figure out. And if you look at polls and different polls and things like that, people are starting to figure out, this is me. You're not representing me anymore. I'm going to go my way. Mm-hmm. And they're going to go vote for, in the last election, a Donald Trump, because they saw the majority of the Republicans, they saw the Democrats as these two separate people. And Donald Trump, he calls himself a Republican. He should have ran as an independent. Him and Sanders should have both just said, I'm an independent. Sanders should have stayed independent. He shouldn't have gone Democrat.
Right.
I think he might have got extra votes that way. But that's kind of what happened, know, and you're right. They see the principle side of it, and then they see the politics side of it, and they're not the same anymore.
Right.
And it has filtered into all these other things that we are going to discuss about campaign finance, like we were talking about with O'Rourke. Look what happened in New York.
That's right.
Cortez. Yeah, Ocasio-Cortez. I forget her first. Andrea. I think it was Andrea.
Yep.
She came out of nowhere because Crowley thought he had it in the bag.
That's right.
He has the money, he has the name recognition, and he didn't walk the streets of his district.
Yeah. And she was out there.
And she won. And I think everybody's got to keep an eye on that. Even Cruz. He said something in a interview a week or so ago that he's not taking this thing for granted. He knows that O'Rourke is coming.
Well, and O'Rourke has come out saying he's going to take a page out of that playbook. He's going to every county. I think 254 counties in Texas.
254.
Yeah,
yes.
He's going to every one of them. He's going to visit with everybody in every county, and give them his views and give his thoughts and listen. Right, and that was his big thing. I'm not taking PAC money, so that I can listen to the people and hear what they have to say and take that. One of the things that he did say that I actually appreciate, he said, "I don't know that I will change my opinion, but I will at least listen to you."
Yeah.
And could you imagine Ted Cruz saying that?
No.
I can't either. And for that fact, really anybody in the U.S. Senate right now. I may not change my opinion, but I want to listen to you. We talked on this show a couple weeks ago about who isn't in the room when anybody from the Senate floor is opining on something.
Empty seats in the C-SPAN window.
You know what? We're in a deficit. Why don't we sell tickets? Let's fill the seats.
I'll go.
I would too. But I would be with you, and we may be the only people in the room, because I'll tell you who's not in the room.
The senators.
Yeah. They're not there. And interestingly enough, and Alan, let's talk kind of history a little bit. So when Congress was originally established following our victory in the Revolutionary War, and we established Congress and the two houses, and we structured it in a way that our congressmen were sent to Washington for a period of time, because it wasn't as easy as it is today. In 3 hours, I can be back in my district. Right. And we didn't have television. We didn't have radio. Matter of fact, they would pass laws, and we down here in the South might not know about that law for a very, very long time.
Months.
Right? It's exactly right.
Months. But
you didn't have this, we're going to make our arguments from the floor and nobody's in the room. right?
Yeah, they were all there.
They were all there.
Yeah.
Because that's what they did. They had to be there. And I couldn't go listen to the sound bites on, C-SPAN later on this afternoon to hear out what you said. I had to be there.
And then argue against you when you're not even in there.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So have we gotten to this place where, Andrew, you had some statistics on fundraising.
Mm-hmm.
What about time that Congress and senators spend fundraising versus what were those statistics?
So on average, they spend 4 to 6 hours per day fundraising. With the RNC and DNC, they have a contractual obligation to raise about $18,000 per day.
Per day.
Yeah. So when are you legislating? That's why those seats are empty. They're making money for their next term.
Right.
And that's, you have to get to the building. You got to get settled. You got to get your phones. Like, when are they doing what we're paying them for?
Yeah.
They're not.
And so I think this drives a bigger conversation that we need to have around campaign finance reform. And, again, for those of you that this is your first show listening to, I can already hear the comments about that lefty with the purple pocket silk if you're watching on camera.
Leftist.
That's right. Just as a disclaimer, I grew up in Texas. I consider myself a conservative. I used to consider myself a Republican. But to your point, Trump ran as a Republican. I don't think at the core foundation of republicanism he's a Republican, but I would argue I don't believe Ted Cruz is either. Because I think that the foundation of the grand old party has changed, and now that if you don't side with the Freedom Caucus or the Tea Party or what we have morphed into becoming, you're a Republican in name only. And we all invoke the name of Ronald Reagan and Abraham Lincoln anytime it suits us. But listen, Abraham Lincoln and the 14th Amendment, right? They had to come together and figure out how do we abolish slavery. I did get that amendment right. That was the 14th, right?
13 or 14.
13th or 14th.
You're close.
Yeah, one of those. Sure.
Plus or minus. Right? But they had to come together. This was a process, and they had to, listen, he had to go get Democrats to side with him. Otherwise, this was not going to happen. And when you go read through how that whole debate happened, I just don't know that would happen in today's Congress.
These great men were educated in ways that we're not. So these days, like, I went to college, I have a bachelor's degree, I learned a little specific subset of knowledge, I'm educated. They didn't have these universities to go to. When you talked about all of the founding fathers having to be in the room, they just debated. That's how they improved their minds, was they got together, looked at an idea, just hashed it out until they got to that point. And we're not doing that.
Yeah. Well, and think about it too, when they weren't in Washington, they were at home, but they were working.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
They were working either with or for somebody, and were listening to the people in their neighborhoods and stuff like that. And then when they got their letter, hey, you need to be back in Washington on this date, then they had all that background, as you just said, they had all that background to take back with them to debate.
But the Republicans
Things
were
like that.
able to talk to the Democrats because they were all in the same room, and that's how you were able to get that cross-party, that bipartisanship that you can't get to.
But to the point that you were just making, Alan, you can't be a common man and run for Congress or the Senate anymore unless you're an outlier like a Cortez, and we'll see if she wins. Likely she will. No, maybe not.
In November, most likely. I mean,
that's a fairly solid Democratic held district.
I don't know. Andrew can say this, but I think the latest poll for her is like 99%. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that's pretty much what she's got.
Yeah, we're definitely not talking about her Republican opponent, are we?
No.
Right. I
don't even know who that
appreciate
is.
after 2016, you guys are still in the prediction game because I'm out. I don't do it. I'm like, nope, I'm not gonna take. Who knows?
This is true.
I think that's a safe prediction though. In New York, 14.
But to my point, though, outside of these outliers in Congress, and I think it still is somewhat possible from time to time in certain congressional districts. But how many millionaires do we have in Congress right now?
So right now,
quite a few.
You've got 1% of Americans are millionaires. 66% of senators are millionaires, and 44% in the House are millionaires.
Yeah.
Those ratios seem a little high.
I don't think Joe Plummer's getting elected, even though he actually did try.
He did.
Right? He ran. I don't think he won. I
think he did a local. I think
was
he
a
started
local
local, and then I don't know if he went for state or not, but I think he did something local and councilman or something like that.
But barring the Cortezes of the world, or even the Sarah Palins of the world, right? Who were hold yourself back, Andrew. Hold yourself. Come on, buddy. Barring these, you know what? To her credit, she saw something that she felt needed to change, and she went after it. And Alaska was structured in a way where that could happen. Could that happen in Texas?
Can I jump in?
I would
I've
love
wanted
it.
to burst in here. I'm dying. Okay, here's what I think. I think the American people love this idea of authenticity. Not only do I think it's the reason one of the big reasons Donald Trump won in 2016, because people felt like even though Hillary Clinton might have been saying the right message, she was difficult to understand and cold and was wearing an ill-fitting presidential suit, whereas Donald Trump sounded like a man and sounded like a guy and sounded like somebody you know. I think it's also part of the reason Mitt Romney lost in 2012, because he's this private equity guy coming in that nobody knows, and it seems like he's in Bain Capital. Nobody knows what that's about. And Barack Obama is, hey, I've never seen a picture of the guy without his sleeves rolled up. He seems real. Like, he seems like a real person. I think when it comes to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, it's kind of the same deal. A year ago, she was a bartender. Like, that's what she was doing. And now she's on her way. And it's kind of the same thing with Beto O'Rourke. So, sure, he's got a lot of money from people, but it's grassroots donations that make the difference. And when you look at Ted Cruz with the giant war chest, I don't know. It turns people off a little bit.
But he's
right?
not someone you want to have a beer with. I think that was always the phrase.
Right.
You want to have a beer with him.
Yeah, there's a lot of off quotes about Ted Cruz, but I think people like authenticity. They want to feel like it's somebody they can reach out and touch and that are real, something they can believe in. I think that's why we get not only boosts and people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez running, but we get people like Donald Trump in office, because for some reason, even though they're on TV, they seem real.
That's right. And to that point on the beers thing, I think probably the more beers you had, the more easy that conversation would be, right? I mean, maybe not a beer.
Unfortunately.
No, but that's a great point, Zach. I think Americans overall, and especially millennials, as we start to see more and more millennials move into, and maybe Alan, you can talk about this, because as these kids are growing up and become, I talked about principles, from a business perspective, when we look at hiring millennials in our organization, oftentimes we have to explain the why factor. If we don't, my generation was about the title, the paycheck, right? How can I buy that BMW someday? The generation younger than me is about what is the mark I am leaving on the world, and I think that ultimately will play into the politics of things. Are you seeing this?
A little bit. I think there's still even people my age that are trying to figure out how can I leave my mark too. But I have noticed just in my classes alone, just that, they are asking, they're asking the whys, but they're also, I don't know, they're just not, they're kind of seeing a bigger picture of how life should be or could be. And we were supposed to talk about social media stuff today. And I think that plays a lot into it, is they're looking at what's it doing for me and how am I going to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that has changed in the political side of it. I think that has changed a lot in that, they're seeing things in just in a different light than when you were growing up, or when I was even growing up in the 80s and early 90s, that we're trying to figure out what's best for us to make money, to make our families work, things like that. And these kids I'm dealing with today, and they're good kids. I'm not trying to say anything negative about that side of it, but I don't see them going that far.
Yeah.
Not yet, at least. Now I've had a great group of kids come through the various schools I've been at, and they hit the ground running, going to college. They're finding the great jobs, things like that. They're making their mark on society in a positive way. And then there's some, they don't care.
Yeah.
And I think, going back to this election stuff, O'Rourke may hit some of these younger, generation people when he's walking the streets here in Texas. But are they really going to care in November to vote for him?
Get in the car, drive to the polling place, get out of the car.
Yeah.
It's a real
You
drag.
got to take the selfie of the I voted sticker. It's very
That's
important.
exactly what it is.
Very important.
That's it. I mean, that's
I
what you
voted.
gotta play. you got to start the hashtag.
I've
So,
definitely taken some of those.
you know,
selfies
does
before,
Cruz-
to be honest.
Does Cruz tap into that? You know, and I know politicians are trying to use more social media, you know, and things like that. But is that really helping them as well?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, does Cruz really need to tap into social media with a war chest as big as his is? Because he may think he's got it in the bag. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know,
I think it's worth.
you look like you want to say
I was
something.
going to
Yeah, sorry, Andrew. Go ahead, please. You've been dying over there. Yeah.
No, I'm good. I was just.
I was going to say, I think it's worth noting that after Beto won the nomination, Cruz's first kind of move against him was a radio ad. Wasn't social media.
That's right.
Wasn't going
Yeah.
viral. This was AM, FM radio. That's where.
Yeah.
That's what he was swinging at. I think he knows. He knows what he's about. I think he knows where his people are. So,
Listen, yeah, he's going after a demographic that's listening to talk radio.
Yeah.
That is dialed in.
Right.
Not the podcast world. That's
True.
right.
Yeah.
So hey, here's my call out to both Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. You are welcome on this show to have a conversation, and we'll bring you somewhere in the middle. And our demographic is all across the board, right?
That's according to
I
statistics.
can give you stats
yes.
on the three
Yeah,
people that
that's-
download this podcast every week. I can tell you
Yeah.
that they are in every a various demographic that's in the voting demographic out there right now. Listen, so we've talked about that. We're gonna break here real quick and come back for segment number 2, where I want to get into term limits, because I think that if we start to look at the amount of campaign money that's going into politics, and we kind of start to meld that with terms, how long congressmen are in place, I think we may start to shine a little bit more light on the overall investment structure. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with segment 2 of Somewhere in the Middle. Welcome back, Somewhere in the Middle. I am Seth Denson, joined in studio today by Andrew Ellsworth Clark. Andrew?
Good to still be here.
Yeah, and in the booth by Zach.
Howdy.
And then, of course, Alan Weaver is our special guest. I call him Coach, so I'm sure I'm going to probably end up saying Coach here at some point. He was one of my high school coaches, government teacher, girls basketball coach at Millsap High School, all-around good guy, and I consider you a dear friend now. So
Appreciate it.
thanks for being here. All right, so last segment we talked a lot about campaign finance and where money goes, and kind of where we are in our overall political cycle. But the other question I want to pose is, where do term limits fall into this? And the reason I make this question is I run a business. And in my business, I don't make, or I try not to make, short-term business decisions on investment. Right. So whether I am building a building or bringing on a new employee or investing in some technology or resource, I want to think about the long-term overall impact. Where I'm going with this is because of Citizens United, and again, as I said in the first segment, I'm not going to argue the merit of that decision from a legal perspective, because I think that the justices looked at the overall Constitution and the way it's structured and made the decision based on that. But that said, when you have unlimited ability to invest money through PACs, combined with the indefinitency, that's a word, right? I didn't just make that up.
Somebody Scrabble check that?
Yeah,
I'll get it. You guys
it
do
is
your thing.
today.
I'll come back
Everybody
with
knows what I
indefinitency.
meant. Everybody knows what I meant. But with the indefinitency that someone can be in Congress, right? They can be reelected as many times as powerful. And we've already established that those with the most money likely will win over those without it. Am I, as a corporation, now looking at persons that I want to be in power and making an investment in them because I can get a return on that investment much easier than anywhere else? What are your thoughts on this?
You want to go first?
I mean, we see lobbying working every day. The pharmaceutical industry in itself, especially the healthcare space we work in, they contribute the most, and they are making fine profits right now.
Right.
I've got a little anecdote, actually, which is a fun one. Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah. So, section in Medicare Part D about pharmaceutical drugs that we've talked about was written by Louisiana Senator Billy Towson. He was the chairman of House Energy and Commerce Committee, and he was receiving massive amounts of financing and lobbying towards his group. 2 years after Medicare Part D passed, he retired and went to work for Pharma, the lobbying group, where he receives a salary of $2 million a year.
As well as his retirement benefits.
As well as his congressional pension to boot.
Yeah.
And you see that, and it's like, yeah, no, there's definitely nothing shady going on here with money in congressional terms, I'm sure.
Well, and we think about this. We think about the length of time that a lot of folks have been in there, and we always talk about the power play, right? And there's no shortage of political shows, and I don't know the overall accuracy of some of what Hollywood wants to put into these political shows and how they, behind the scenes really operate. But I got to think that there's some truth to the fact that when people get there, they are very heavily influenced by money. And because of the ability to stay in Congress indefinitely, that money becomes the driving force for many of them rather than going to Washington to vie for their constituents and do what's in the best interest of them. Just a couple of quick statistical points. So the average current... What do we say, Andrew? We were looking at this earlier. The average senator right now is 2 terms, and the average congressman is 5 terms. Now, shorter terms, right? So we got about 10 years there because they're two-year terms. But then you start to get into some of these other folks, like, let's see, Congressman John Conyers out of New York, I believe. 53 years this guy has been in D.C., recently retired John Dingell out of Michigan, where, Zach, you were traveling to
Michigan.
This week. He retired in 2016. He was elected in 1955. All right. And then Robert Byrd, 56 years out of, I believe Robert Byrd was Virginia or West Virginia? I think it was West Virginia, right? Because in that,
yes.
West Virginia. Who, by the way, a known Klansman in the Democratic Party.
Yep.
Now, again, I'm
only for 20 years in his youth. Come on.
I'm a follower of Christ. I'm all about forgiveness, right? And I'm glad the Democratic Party was too, as were his constituents. But 57 years. I mean, at some point, you got to stay. You start to look at this and say, are you out of touch with reality, and are you there as a career as opposed to being a public servant?
Yeah, that's where and I don't know. I haven't got, again, I haven't researched all of this because of the late timing on this, but I'm curious to know if anybody, and Andrew might know this, but, we really haven't been talking about term limits for congressmen or senators up until these last 5 years, maybe.
Right.
Because to the best of my knowledge, they were going there and they were doing things. Mm-hmm. They were working. They were passing laws. They were raising money for, infrastructure, things like that were going on. But as you pointed out, some of them have been there since the 50s. And I'm thinking of you didn't mention John McCain, but he was elected in the late 70s, I believe, or right around 1980.
Yeah. Orrin Hatch.
And so
Utah, yeah,
they've. There are people that have been there a long time. Now, is that their, quote unquote fault? I mean, they're getting reelected.
That's right.
So it's not there that they're, they're there because they want or they have to be. They want to be there, but people are voting them back in over and over and over again as well.
Right.
And, whether going back to the last segment, does that deal with money? Sometimes it does, but when you're getting reelected over and over again, it's
on the voters at that point.
I was going to say both sides actually have to take some blame on that, because one, a congressman or a senator, they're wanting to stay there for that power, but they're convincing their voters to keep them in there.
Right.
And that's, I'm a big believer in term limits. I think, and I've, again, referencing my classes a little bit, I have my government class towards the end of the semester. They're kind of the end of the semester project is to write an amendment or, make a law or something like that, just to, get them involved in that whole process. And I've, over the years, I've had several classes or groups of kids in those classes. They've written an amendment for this. They see the same thing. They see these people staying there over and over and over again. And yeah, they may be getting some stuff done early on in their career, but what are they doing now? It goes back to what you said earlier. They show up to their office and they're immediately on their phone or checking email for money.
Yep.
They're not debating. They may be writing a bill,
Maybe.
or they're being convinced just to be a cosigner, and they're not doing all the research and everything like that as well. So there's a lot of, again, we can place blame on a lot of people, the voters and the congressmen, women, or whatever, of being there the whole this long period of time.
Yep.
But I personally, again, not to reflect on the school,
Sure.
but I personally think there needs to be term limits for congressmen and senators,
And
because there are some there. They've outlived their welcome.
Yeah, and I think that to that point, too, if you have term limits, then you want to be principled, by all means. Pick your things that you're principled about. By the way, nobody's principled on 100% of everything, even though I think sometimes we want to send people that are. But you get to go there, you get to opine, you get to push, you get to make known your thoughts, and then you leave. Right? It's not that right now. I think our principle is on getting reelected.
So how many years would you have them be there ideally? What is the Denson term limit battle plan?
So I'm now writing my end of year paper for Alan's class.
There you go.
I like this. I think, listen, in Congress, I think 12 years.
2 terms? 6 too short.
No,
18
Congress is going to be going to be their 2-year terms.
They're
So 6
2-year
terms,
terms, yeah.
right? Again, because I think that if you limit it shorter than that, it takes a little while to kind of get the run of the land, lay of the land, right? So, but I think in Congress, I think 6 terms is probably a good amount. Yeah. Senate, because those are 4-year terms.
6 years.
I mean, 6-year terms. That's right.
So president there.
I know, right? Maybe you have 3 terms there, so it's a little bit longer, and you stagger those a little bit. That would maybe be a good idea. Only because you definitely don't want these swathing changes of power or changes of people in the Beltway that know how the thing works.
Some more change at the state level in the House.
That's right. Then because otherwise you get a lot of rookies in there that go, okay, now what do we do?
Yeah.
I'll just listen to the senator. He'll tell me what to do.
That's right. That's right.
That's exactly it.
But I think that would help. Again, that personal opinion there, but I think that would help because, again, to what we talked about earlier, it's more about raising money. It's more about getting elected and re-elected, and because of that, we ultimately end up with what we have now, which is what is Congress's approval rating?
14%.
And what's their re-election rating?
90%.
There you go. 14% of Americans say, no, this is bad, and 90% of the time, the guy or gal in office gets reelected. Yeah. Because if you ask the majority of people, I hate Congress, but I like my congressman, right? But we get nowhere, and that's ultimately the reason why we don't like it. So, hey, listen, great show. This is going to be our time for the day. Alan, will you come back?
Oh, yeah. If I get the time, I will.
And maybe get the time, and I won't change in the 11th hour what we're going to be talking about. Matter of fact, I'll hold on to the topic that maybe we had, and we'll have you back real quick. Big thanks for coming in.
You bet.
Man.
It was fun.
Yeah,
thanks for having me
Loved
out.
having you in studio, and thanks for the influence you were on my life. I know that the kids that you are impacting right now are in so much of a better place for the rest of their life because I know the impact you had on me. And so thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
Appreciate that. And Abigail, too.
Yeah,
She's
like I said, like I told you earlier, she wanted to be here. But
Yeah.
she's
Well,
being a parent today.
we'll have her come in next time. Andrew, buddy,
Thank you.
thanks for being part of it. Zach, welcome back, man. It was great having you back.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a good time.
Big thanks to Matt last week, but man, it was good having you back. As always, Matt did a great job filling in, but we're always glad to have Zach back. Big thanks to all the folks here at Real News Communications that made this one happen. Big thanks, as always, to my beautiful wife, Jenna, my wonderful daughters, Emerson and Arabella.
Oh.
They are my reason for life, and I love them dearly, and thank them for allowing Daddy to come in and do this. Thanks to all the folks that are commenting on this show and sending in thoughts and ideas. Please do like us, rate us, rank us, and review us on all of the podcast channels. That helps us move up in the rankings, and maybe Real News will keep us on air for a little bit longer.
It takes 10 seconds. It's a lot of fun. You should try it. Rate and review. It's a good time.
We would appreciate it. And so this will be posted up later today on most of those sites, likely. So feel free to do that. If you have a thought or opinion, feel free to email us here at sethdensonshow@gmail.com. That's a way to send us your thoughts and ideas. If you have a topic you want us to bring up on Somewhere in the Middle, feel free to do that. We covered a lot of really good topics today. I think this idea of campaign finance reform and what that really looks like, as well as term limits, possibly. I think these all things have merit, and I think most of the U.S. citizens can agree somewhere in the middle on this. But I will tell you, while I may be considering a number of things, I do know where I land on this. Yesterday was Sunday in the Denson household, and Sundays in the summer mean NASCAR. I love Sundays. Because after church, when it's 110 degrees out here in Texas, I get to sit back in my comfortable couch in my bought air with a cold one in hand and enjoy 3 hours of left-hand turns with a few crashes within the mix. This past Sunday was no different from the others, except for one thing that did catch my eye that I had not seen before. It was on the number 18 car driven by Kyle Busch, for those of you that aren't NASCAR fans. On the lower left side of the rear bumper, just beyond the Interstate Battery logo, was the inscription John 3:16. For those of you not familiar with the scripture, you've probably seen this in other places. It can be found in the bottom of every Forever 21 shopping bag or on the print of any food or drink wrapper from In-N-Out Burger. It's a reference to one of the most popular scriptures in the Bible, where we learn just how great God's love is for all of us. And seeing this scripture on the back of one of the most popular NASCAR drivers' bumpers brings up an interesting point of branding. The driver is establishing himself as a man of principle. But whose principle? Is this Kyle Busch sharing his faith? Or did Interstate Battery, who is also along that back bumper, pay him to put it out there as part of their corporate belief? Regardless, the shared logo on the car of the driver likely means that somehow they are all associated, which got me to thinking about Congress. Recently, we've seen the rise of extremist voices on both the right and the left. Are these principled folk, or are their voices bought and sold, just like the advertising space on a stock car? Does everyone doubt that corporations influence our politicians? Does anyone doubt this? Not just Congress, but local governments, mayoral candidates, and yes, even presidents. But the difference between those politicians and those in Congress is that local, state, and even presidents oftentimes have term limits, but not so much in Congress. Corporations can be around for a long time, and seemingly so can congressmen and women. Given this prospect, companies likely seek to get the best return on investment over the years, and will seek out these men and women of principle, or dare I say, individuals that share their principles, to help them do just that. As we think about campaign contributions and the recent Citizens United decision declaring that corporations can be people, we should continue to question the role that lobbying plays in influencing decisions. Money talks, and more often than not, it talks for the congressman and his investors rather than his constituents. Influencers have the ability to give unlimited amounts of money to men and women who can be in a place of influence indefinitely. As a result, we end up with candidates who don't necessarily have the greatest potential, rather the most access to money. It's beyond time that we limit how long politicians can be in Congress, or at the very least, limit how much money they receive from their masters. While it's highly unlikely we'll see Congress pass term limits on themselves, I'm hopeful that just like the logos on a NASCAR, someday we'll at least have the opportunity to see what's on their bumpers, who their advertisers are, and who's paying them to make left-hand turns all day. Finding myself somewhere in the middle, I'm Seth Denson.